out with Mr. Coluccia, one of our religion teachers here at Xavier, and we're going to ask him a few questions on evolution and see what his opinions are. Mr. Coluccia, the first question would be, according to the Bible, how old is the Earth, and how does that fit into evolution?
I think when you're talking about the Bible, and again, this is what I love about the Catholic tradition, that we both incorporate Revelation as inspired from both Scripture and both the works of various doctors and members of the Church who have contributed to it for the better for over 2,000 years. I think you have to look in two ways. On the one hand, you have the literalist interpretation of Genesis, which says, in the beginning God created the heavens and earth in 6 days. On the seventh day he rested. Thomas Aquinas in Summa Theologica had wise comments about the interpretation of Scripture. He said, in the absence of evidence that proves to the contrary, we are to understand the divine revelation of God in the Bible to be taken literally. Again, in absence of evidence to the contrary. You also have to remember that the Bible is written in various ways, creation narratives, as far as stories with deeper meanings behind the nature of who we are, and not just necessarily literal, poetical, historical, wisdom literature, so something like the Song of Songs or the Book of Kings and the Book of Proverbs, in which Solomon lists out all of his different pieces of wisdom for the Israelites, which is another story there. You have the eyewitness testimonial accounts of the gospel. You have the epistles of Paul. You have the recount of the dreamlike acts in the book of Revelations. So you have a lot of different narratives and different ways of writing in the Bible that have to be understood beyond historical critical means, and also understood in the context they were written. That being said, Genesis is a narrative that surely, in light of this new evidence and the strong case for evolution, would be one of those instances Thomas Aquinas would say, well, we have to understand it in a different sense, given the evidence that we do have. So the question then becomes, and it's something that, again, if we're talking about omnipotent God, the question is, well, what is a day then? And most people have heard this before. Is a day 1,000 years, as it says in one of the later books in the Bible? I don't know which one it is off the top of my head. Great religion teacher, right? Is it 1,000,000 years? Is it 1,000,000,000 years? So I think you have to think about that as well. One thing I find fascinating about the first creation story, because there's one that talks about how the universe was formed and then how the first humans were formed, so you have two creation stories there, is how a lot of it seems to stack up in how we discovered the universe and consequently life here on Earth to form. First the stars, the heavens, the sun as we see day and night, the oceans forming, and how the oceans, the lands forming, all the birds, then the animals, and with the plants coming before all that. So the order in which the universe and consequently life on Earth here is created, I think is one of those truths revealed, although not by our language chronologically correct, at least the way we see it written down on paper. You still have that truth there. But I also think what's necessary too is to understand the language in which it was written. You have to remember, we have no understanding of Hebrew in the English language, and we also have to understand that the New Testament as well was written in the Greek. So, and just like all languages, Greek and Hebrew have different words for different meanings, similar to English as well. So you have to consider the different meanings as well. I'm not well educated enough to highlight the different meanings. I wasn't an Old Testament or New Testament scholar. But I think when you look at exactly how that language is written, you have even more of a revelation poured out. So I think that's best left to Old and New Testament scholars who get paid to do that rather than me.
Okay, and right now, you kind of led into the next question when you said there's a way that how the creation was made with the order it was done with the stars, the earth, and then the birds leading to the animals, and then finally into humans. Is there a possibility you can believe in God and also agree with evolution?
Oh, absolutely. First off, if we're talking about the Bible itself, well, actually, no. First off, I want to just say evolution. First of all, if we're talking about life as a whole and where did life come from, evolution is after the fact. If we want to be concerned about life itself, we have to look at the origin of life and how life first came to be formed on this earth. As far as I know, and I know there have been successive attempts to do this, there has been no possibility of life being able to be produced from non-life or non-living material. That's called spontaneous generation or abiogenesis. To my knowledge, and Dr. Glazer can correct me on this if I am mistaken, but no non-living matter has produced living matter. So for evolution to start, you would even have to ask yourself, well, how did life start on the planet in the first place? Where did life come from? The second question you have to ask too, I think, is, how did the universe start? I think if we're talking about the Genesis narrative, it's fascinating how the theory of the Big Bang, and again, if we're talking about theory as a scientific theory, we're talking about one that's backed up by a good, strong deal of evidence, much the same way we talk about evolution as a theory thus supported with good evidence from the fossil record, from DNA, so on and so forth. You have to ask yourself the question of, well, how did the universe get started? And the 5 elements called surge theory that support evidence for the Big Bang existing look remarkably similar to how life was formed, or at least how life began in the universe. First of all, it implies that in order for the universe to start, there had to be something, a first cause outside of the universe to have created it. Before time, before matter, before space, before the laws of physics and the laws of this universe that we have. That implies that there had to be something out there to cause that. The laws can't just be self-existing. That makes it run into a circle. The second thing is, as far as life itself, if you look at the Earth, how did it come to be, if it is luck and chance, how did it come to be such a matter of, well, how is it possible for life on Earth to even be formed, considering how chaotic the universe is going? If we're talking about the second law of thermodynamics, as a system expands, as the longer a system is, the more it undergoes entropy or disorder, which I think is fascinating. The second part I find fascinating about evolution, again, I could be wrong about this, is how if we are talking about species evolving, we're talking about the DNA and the molecular structure in there. The fact that all that information is being recorded in the species and allowing it to adapt and make those changes, well, I see a greater degree of complexity as one species moves to another, as it's adapting to its habitat. So I find order within the disorder. I think that's God's hand at work. So for me, if anything, much the same way as a literal 7-day interpretation would provide 100% evidence for God's existence, I think both the origin of the universe coming from an outside creator, a designer, and the hand of